Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the keynote address of the Savannah Book Festival. I'm Bob Zerbe, president of the Savannah Book Festival Board of Directors, and it's my privilege to work alongside so many dedicated and passionate people, volunteers who have helped bring this year's festival to life. On behalf of our entire board, our small but dedicated and hard-working staff of Tara, Mickey, and Joyce, and the more than 200 volunteers who make this festival possible, we're pleased to have you here tonight for the keynote address with Sebastian Junger. The festival could not bring remarkable voices like Anna Quinlan, Sebastian Junger, and Ben Mesrick to our beautiful city without the support of our chairperson's circle of sponsors, including the Beekman family, David and Nancy Cintron, Robert Faircloth, the Courtney Knight Gaines Foundation, Betsy Lancaster, Doctors Mickey and Kristen Ott, the Gerald D. and Helen M. Stevens Foundation, Robert and Linda Zerbe, and an investment from the city of Savannah. We are deeply grateful for all of that support. A special thank you goes to Mrs. Maura Sofchin for sponsoring tonight's keynote address with Sebastian Junger. We would also like to acknowledge our wonderful donors and volunteers whose time, expertise, and resources make the festival possible. Their support allows us to bring notable authors, ensure that these authors and other visitors experience Savannah's excellent hospitality, and offer a festival Saturday that is free and open to everyone. I'd also like to thank the volunteers here tonight who have helped us keep things running smoothly. Please join me in recognizing the members of the Foodie Book Club, the Read, Run, and Rant Book Club, and the Happy Bookers Book Club. I think there's some evidence that these book clubs are having too much fun at their meetings. A very special thanks goes to the 24 authors who arrived early at this year's festival so that they could participate in SBF at schools. These authors have spent time this morning with students in our community, sharing their writing journeys and inspiring the next generation of readers and storytellers. I had the good fortune this morning of joining David Wroblewski at Groves High School. It's a beautiful new school here in Savannah, and he discussed it in a very engaging way, the writing process and its challenges with students in language arts classes. And the positive way that the students responded demonstrated to me once again how important it is to expose students to real authors who have successfully navigated the difficult path to publication. David captured the interest and imagination of the students as he described the strategies, challenges, and rewards of writing great fiction. And by the way, contrary to the characterization in our printed materials, his novel, Familiaris, is a work of fiction, not nonfiction, and it is a wonderful work of fiction. The book festival is constantly looking for new ways to help the Savannah community, and in October, the Savannah Book Festival piloted an elementary school version of SBF for schools, which was very successful, and with your help, we hope to expand this in the future. Before we dive into tonight's keynote, just a few housekeeping details, and you've heard them all before. Please silence your cell phones, no flash photography. Following Sebastian's talk, there will be a Q&A session to ask questions. So please raise your hand, and a volunteer will bring a microphone around. I'll point out where we want to send it. And we ask you to keep the question brief. This always allows then more people to ask questions and have an opportunity to participate. After the Q&A, Sebastian will be signing festival purchase copies of his books. Please make sure that you've picked up a numbered signing card from the booksellers to secure your place in line. Now it's my great honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, a writer whose works have captivated readers around the world and whose explorations of conflict, community, and the human spirit have profoundly shaped the way we understand ourselves and our society. Sebastian Junger is a journalist, author, and filmmaker whose work has consistently challenged us to look deeper at the forces that shape our world. His best-selling books include The Perfect Storm, a riveting account of a deadly storm that struck the North Atlantic in 1991, and War, in which he chronicles the brutal realities of modern combat, offering an intimate portrait of soldiers in Afghanistan. In his book, Tribe, Junger explores the human need for connection, arguing that modern society often isolates us, while those in extreme circumstances, like soldiers in war, find deep, meaningful bonds with one another. And Sebastian's ability to tackle the complexities of human nature, whether in the midst of battle, in the quiet moments of community, or as he battles for his own life, has made him one of the most insightful and thought-provoking voices of our time. His writing not only examines the external conflicts that shape our lives, but provides internal struggles that we all face in the quest for meaning and connection. We're incredibly honored to have him here as our keynote speaker. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage, Sebastian Junger.
No, perfect. Thank you. What a pleasure to be here in this beautiful city, on this beautiful day, and to be invited to speak to you for an hour. So, I was a war reporter for a long time, and as a result, I always thought that death was very dramatic. I had a number of close calls overseas. I was blown up by a roadside bomb in Afghanistan. I had a bullet hit so close to my head into a sandbag that it kicked sand into the side of my face. And it was fired from maybe 500 meters or so. So you can imagine the angle, the tiny angle on that saved my life. I was in the Niger Delta covering an insurgent group called the Movement for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta. They were Ijal warriors, and they fought painted and covered with charms and amulets, and absolutely fierce, terrifying people. And I was detained by them. And they in the creeks of the Niger River, and they accused me of being an American spy. And one of these guys came up to me, and he said very casually, "When we kill you later, I'll be the one to do it," just sort of by way of introduction. And I remember thinking, just don't let your knees buckle, like stay standing. But I eventually got out of the war business. I got out when my friend, my colleague, my brother, Tim Hetherington, was killed in combat in Libya. He bled to death from a shrapnel wound in his abdomen in the back of a rebel pickup truck racing for the Misrata hospital. He almost made it. He missed it by minutes. And after that, I turned towards life. I got married. I had a family, 2 little girls who are now 8 and 5. And that was when I found out the really scary thing about death. Not that it's dramatic, but that it can be incredibly mundane, very ordinary, just something that might or might not happen on a beautiful summer day. I didn't know that. So this story takes place during COVID. My family and I have an old property, an old house in the woods in Massachusetts at the end of a dead-end dirt road. There's no cell phone signal. The landlines are old, so when it rains, they short out and they don't work. It's paradise, basically. And one night, just before dawn, I had a dream. And in the dream, I was hovering above my family, and they were crying and sobbing, and I was trying to signal them, I'm here. I was waving my arm, I was shouting, and they couldn't hear me, they couldn't see me, and I was confused. I didn't understand why. And I was eventually made to understand that they couldn't see me because I was dead. I was a spirit, and I was outbound, and there was no coming back, and that was it. I was so anguished, as you could imagine. I woke up, and we co-sleep, and I woke up next to my oldest daughter, who was 3 at the time, in the sort of gray light of dawn. And the dream was so realistic that when I woke up, I was confused by where I was. Oh my God, I'm alive. That was a dream, thank God. I grabbed my little girl. There's a, as a parents know, you comfort your children over and over and over again as they grow up, but there will come a time when they have to comfort you. And that time for me came unnaturally early at age 58 when my daughter was 3. I drew incredible comfort from the fact that I could hear her breathing, and there I was. I could see her, I could feel her. And then I didn't think anything more about it. Weird dream, right? I didn't know, but I had 36 hours left to live at that point. The end of the next day, we get a call from some teenage girls who live up the road, who are daughters of people we know, and they offered to babysit. And this is during COVID, and we have a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old, and of course we said yes. We pay $1,000 an hour. How soon can you get here? So these girls came over and took care of our kids for a while. My wife and I went out in the woods to a cabin that I'd built that was even further off the grid, the wood stove, oil lamp, no electricity, nothing, looking out over this beautiful little pond. It was basically the most beautiful place in the world. And it was in this place of peace and beauty, tranquility, and connection that I found out. We were talking, and in mid-sentence, I felt a pain shoot through my abdomen. Now, I'm a lifelong athlete, I'm healthy, I'm not a walking heart attack. In my arrogance, it never occurred to me that I could actually have something that would kill me before dinner time, right? I mean, other than getting hit by a bus. But I didn't realize that. So I felt this pain in my abdomen. I wasn't particularly worried, but it was awfully puzzling because I couldn't make it go away. I thought it was indigestion or something. It was quite intense. And I couldn't make it go away, and I stood up and tried to walk it out. And I took a couple of steps and almost fell over. And I sat back down, and I said to my wife, Barbara, words I never thought I'd have to say. I said, I think I'm going to need some help. I didn't know it, but I had an aneurysm in my abdomen, my pancreatic artery, which is like a little artery that no one really needs to think about. And an aneurysm is an unnatural ballooning, weakening of the artery wall, and it will bulge out and bulge out and bulge out, and over the course of decades, a whole lifetime. They're very hard to detect. They're often without any symptoms at all. And eventually, when the artery wall gets thin enough, it will rupture. And this is very rare. The kind that I had was very rare, very deadly, not related to any other health issue. It really was a kind of sleeper cell in my body that was just waiting to kill me for 20 or 30 years, probably. And see, it ruptured. And now I'm bleeding out just like my buddy Tim did, except into my own abdomen. I was losing probably a pint of blood every 10 or 15 minutes. There's 10 pints in your body. you can lose about half of that before you die. And we lived an hour from the hospital. So you can do the math. I was literally a human hourglass. If someone stabs you in the stomach, in some ways they do you a favor because the doctors know immediately what's wrong. They know where to put their finger to plug the leak. It's all very obvious. With internal bleeding, it's a mystery. No one knows. I certainly didn't know. The medics in the ambulance had no idea that I was dying. None of us knew. My wife grabbed me by the waist and dragged me through the woods and got me to the parking lot. To the driveway, and put me in the parked car in the passenger seat, and ran in and told the babysitters that there was an emergency. And I remember one of them coming out. It had rained, so the landline didn't work. So I remember her coming out and trying to get a signal on her cell phone, walking in sort of figure eights in the dirt driveway. And she got one bar of signal and called 911, and the ambulance came. Meanwhile, my wife is sort of holding my hand, and I'm going in and out of consciousness, and every time I lose consciousness, she thinks I'm not coming back, that's it. And at one point, she's saying, stay with me, and at one point, I came back to her, and everything I could see turned electric white, and I realized I was going blind. And I said, I'm going blind. That was when I knew I was in real trouble. So they loaded me into the ambulance, and the body's a miracle. It's an incredible thing. My body, I had no idea I was dying, but my body knew. I went into something called compensatory shock. So what your body does is it constricts the arteries. The muscles contract, and they squeeze off the arteries, and they pool your blood in your brain, in your heart, in your chest, where it's needed. And so my blood pressure went back up for a little while. So in the ambulance, I'm sort of weirdly clear. Like I almost thought, I don't need to go to the hospital, I'm good. You can stay in compensatory shock for only so long, and then eventually your body gives out. And that's what happened to me right as we pulled in to the hospital. Now, this is a little regional hospital on Cape Cod, right? I went off a cliff. My blood pressure plunged to 60/40. I'd lost probably half my blood at that point. And now I'm actively dying. I'm dead in 10 minutes if something doesn't happen. I'm in hemorrhagic shock. I'm convulsing with hypothermia. I'm not of right mind. And I still don't know I'm dying, right? So they rushed me into the trauma bay. Meanwhile, one of the doctors calls my house and finally gets through on the line and tells my wife to get to the hospital as fast as possible. She knew what that meant. And she forced herself to drive the speed limit because she didn't want to have an accident and have our children lose both their parents in one afternoon. So I'm in the trauma bay, and a doctor comes up to me and says, I'd like permission to put it, if anyone asks this of you, just say yes immediately. I'd like permission to put a needle through your neck into your jugular to transfuse you. But I said, why, in case there's an emergency? And he said, Mr. Junger, this is the emergency. So I gave the okay. It didn't seem like it was going to be a lot of fun. It actually didn't feel like anything. And while he's prepping my neck for the procedure, all of a sudden I became aware of something underneath me. Now I have to pause for a moment and say I'm an atheist, lifelong atheist. My father was an atheist and a physicist, which is like atheist squared. So you need that context to understand what I'm about to say. Beneath me and to my left, I became aware of a black pit, the opening, a black opening, a sort of crack in the universe that was infinitely deep, infinitely dark, and I was getting pulled into it. And I didn't know I was dying, but I knew I had the sort of instincts of a wounded coyote or something. I knew if you go into the infinitely black pit, you're not coming back out. Like, that's a one-way trip, and I was terrified of it. And then above me arrived my father, my dead father. He'd been dead 8 years. And he was up there above me, also slightly to my left, in this sort of energy form. It was like his essence was there. And he communicated to me, it's okay, you don't have to fight it. You can come with me, I'll take care of you. I was absolutely horrified. I mean, first I was shocked that he was there, right? Above me, dead 8 years. And I was horrified that he would think I would want to join him. I was like, you're dead. Why would I go with you? The party's over here, right? And I turned and I said to the doctor, I turned my head and I said to the doctor who was working on my neck, you got to hurry. I'm going. I didn't know where I was going, but it was very clear I was going. And later one of the doctors said to me, you had about 10 minutes left. So they brought me into this miraculous little room called the Interventional Radiology Suite. Now, doctors and some non-doctors and nurses will know what that is. I had no idea. So interventional radiology, in the old days, to fix something like what I had, and many, many other things, you would have to cut the person open, and in my case, they would have to sort of root around my organs looking for a small artery that's behind a whole lot of stuff that's bleeding in an abdomen filled with blood before you bleed out. The outcomes aren't, as doctors say, outcomes often are not what we prefer, right? But with interventional radiology, they can put a catheter, a flexible wire, and then a tube, narrow tube, in through your groin or other places as well, and thread it through your vascular system, through your arterial system, with a sort of the top of the front of the wire has a sort of little bend in it, and by twisting that, they can thread it through branches in the artery and around curves, and they can get it almost anywhere. And then they can fix you without cutting you open. With me, what they had to do was plug the artery that was bleeding so that I would stop bleeding to death. Now, because I have some very strange, and again, this is just a random genetic thing, I have a very strange vascular system, arterial system. They couldn't get it to the bleed. They could not get the catheter to where they needed to go to embolize, to plug the ruptured artery. And I was on the fluoroscope. So they guide it with, you're on something called a fluoroscope, which is basically an X-ray machine, but it gives you real-time video. And of course, you get a fair amount of radiation because they're sort of watching in real time as this catheter is moving through your body, and they're backing up and then rethreading. And I was on there for 4 hours, and I got enough radiation that radiation burns show up like a couple of weeks later. So after I got home from the hospital, there was this weird red square on my back, and it came from the plate, a metal plate that I was on the machine. And it turns out it was a radiation burn. And my wife was pretty upset about it. And I tried to cheer her up by making a joke, which is almost always the wrong idea. And I said, honey, it's okay. Let's name it. We can call it Square Noble. And the wrong move, one of many. Anyway, so they worked and worked and worked, and they couldn't get the catheter to the rupture to save me, which meant that I was going to have to go into the OR. And now I'm back in the sort of Civil War surgery odds, right? Not literally, but it sort of felt like that's what it would have been. The doctor later told me if they'd had to do that, my wife had arrived at the hospital, and this is during COVID, but they gave her an exemption and allowed her to come into the hospital, which was another thing that made her realize how much danger I was in. And they said they would have brought her in to say goodbye for the surgery. So I'm lying on the fluoroscope, and one of the doctors, I remember him saying, and I'm not sedated because my vital signs are too low, so I'm on a little bit of fentanyl, but I remember everything, and I'm in incredible pain, absolute agony. And one of the things that really helped, actually, was human touch. It's really extraordinary, the effect of human touch on pain. And this nurse, I remember this nurse would hold my hand and say, "It's okay, I'm here, breathe with me." And I would, and immediately the pain would subside. It was really extraordinary how that worked. In this modern age of medicine, of narcotics and medicine and all this stuff, that touch is almost magical in its power. At any rate, I remember like 1 a.m, one of the doctors looking at the other doctor, and he went like this, and he said, "We tried. There's nothing more we can do." And the other one nodded. And in my mind, I'm like, "What do you mean what? Like, I'm just in for belly pain. What, can you just fix this so I can go home?" I had no idea that I was dying. And the other one nodded and said, "Yeah, okay." And then the first one said, "Maybe we could go through his left wrist. Maybe that would work." And it actually allowed for an angle of attack that got them to where they needed to go. So when I heard that solution, "Maybe we can try this," and the other doctor said, "I like the way you think," I realized that they were sort of inventing it on the fly, right? And that I must have had a very rare and dangerous problem, and that I might not make it home. That was the moment it sank in, and it's the most profoundly lonely feeling. Combat's a piece of cake. You're with other people that you even love, have come to love, no problem. That was a terrible moment for me. It was as bad as the Ijah warrior saying, when we kill you, I'll be the one to do it. It was as bad and lonely and terrible as that moment. Well, it works. They saved me. They saved my life. Then I'm in this sort of wild darkness. I think they sedated me. I'm in this sort of wild darkness. It's kind of pleasant and infinite and seems to be going on and on and on. And a lot of time seems to have passed. And the next thing I know, I hear a woman with a really intense Boston accent, which was really confusing to me. My eyes are still closed, and I just hear this Boston accent, and that's a rough accent, right? I'm from Boston, and I'm like, I'm probably not in heaven. Like, I don't know, like, doesn't look good, right? So I open my eyes, and there's this. I'm looking at this middle-aged ICU nurse who's tough as nails, heart of gold, that kind of lady, and she looked like she'd buried 3 husbands, and don't waste her time, and you might want to try to not die on her shift as well, like if you can help it. That kind of person, tremendous woman, and she said, "Congratulations, Mr. Junger, you made it. We almost lost you last night. You almost died. In fact, no one can quite believe you're alive. It's a miracle." And then she left the room, and I sat there. I've got wires coming out of me and tubes and everything, and every 15 minutes I'm throwing up blood. There was for some reason, a lot of blood in my stomach, and it was awful, sort of awful situation. And she came back an hour later and said, "How are you doing?" and I'm an old school Stoic, and I'm like, oh, I'm fine. The throwing up blood, I do it all the time, no problem, right? Yeah, just could you change the channel for me? No, I said I'm fine, but what you said is terrifying. I had no idea I almost died, and I can't stop thinking about it. My little girls almost lost their dad. My wife almost lost her husband. My mom was still alive, and no one wants to bury their child, right? I mean, it was just unthinkable and unimaginable. I said, I can't, it's so terrifying. I can't stop thinking about it. And she said this incredibly wise thing. She said, try this. Instead of thinking about it like something scary, try thinking about it like something sacred. And then she walked out. Now, like I said, I'm an atheist, but I reserve the right to use these beautiful words that are used in religious practice for my own purposes, and the word sacred is a good one. And in my mind, something sacred is a sacred information, a sacred task, a sacred job, is anything that helps preserve human dignity. Teachers, school teachers are doing sacred work. Doctors sometimes, psychologists, ministers and priests often are doing sacred work. And even journalists, like on our best days, we go somewhere, Ukraine, Gaza, wherever it may be. My first war was Bosnia in 1993, and then Afghanistan in 1996. I've been going to these places most of my adult life. And we go to these places and we come back with information that hopefully will allow the world to make good decisions about how to preserve human dignity, how to protect people, protect human life. That's our role. That's our job at our best. It's a sacred process. It can be, not always, but it can be. So I thought to myself, even there throwing up blood in the ICU, I thought to myself, okay, you've been a journalist your whole life. You've gone to many front lines. You've come back with information that could be sacred depending on how it's used, if it's used well. You've gone to the ultimate front line, your own mortality, a place we're all going, a place that is terrifying to almost everyone except those in tremendous pain. Have I come back with something, with sacred information? Have I come back with something that could help people face their own mortality with more dignity, more peace, more love, more connection? Did I do that? And that moment was the start of my book, In My Time of Dying. Now I got home. I got out of the ICU in sort of record time, right? I mean, I sort of take pride in weird things, and I was a former athlete, and I broke a record getting out of the ICU with what I had. The doctors were amazed, et cetera, et cetera, So I was trying to make myself feel good where I could, because in fact, I was a physically very compromised person with 5 units of blood sloshing around my abdomen that would take months to dissipate and to be reabsorbed, and a completely shattered psyche. The trauma of this completely eclipsed anything I'd experienced in war. War is impersonal. That's what's scary about it. And you're in it with other people, and that's what makes it bearable. Something came after me. My body betrayed me. I experienced what it felt like to die. And to make matters worse, I dreamt that it would happen 2 days prior. all of that was deeply terrifying to me. And my wife picked me up. It was a hot, hot June day. We drove home with the windows rolled down because I wanted to smell the world, smell the air, all these things that I'd almost lost. We got home, we drove up the dirt driveway, and there were signs tacked to the trees that my daughters had drawn, and the babysitters had written, "Daddy, we miss you, we love you, come home." I was, by the time I got to the house, I was sobbing. It reminded me of coming home from war. It's not a party. It's not a celebration. It's a memorial for something. It's a memorial for, in some ways, your loss of innocence. And it was extremely painful. And one of the things that made it painful was that I had young children. And just the innocence and the beauty of children is so profound. It's so staggering that when you're exposed to it, it's hard not to be terrified that could be taken away from you. I'd never thought about it before. And I'd almost been wrenched out of their lives. And I've faced things that were very scary to me without being too troubled by it. This broke me. I remember at one point my older daughter, and their wisdom is so profound, right? And my older daughter, we walked out the driveway to where the pavement starts and did some chalk drawings. And, unicorns and hearts and rainbows and stuff. And she wrote her name in big letters, and we went home. And it rained that night. And my daughter said, "Daddy, do you think the chalk drawings are still there?" And I was like, I wasn't going to be the one to tell her, right? And so I said, "Well, let's go out and look, but let's just bring the chalk just in case," right? So we walked out there, and she, of course, the chalk drawings were gone. It had poured rain, and she frowned and she said, "If the rain had known how beautiful they were, it never would have washed them away," right? She said that about a month before I almost died. And she really got to the heart of this very profound aspect of life, which is like, does anyone notice? Are we being noticed? Does it have any meaning? Does the universe, has it recognized our pain and our heroism and our accomplishments and all of the whole drama of human life? Like, is it noticing any of this? And is it all just going to be washed away? I mean, is that the situation we're in? And if so, how do we make our own meaning of it while we're here? Because that's all we got. And, without realizing it, she, posed that central human question, and then she kind of answered it. And she said, "Where's the chalk?" Right? And she started right back in. And so for me, when I was encountering some of my struggles afterwards, which I'll talk about a little bit, in my mind, I was like, okay, but where's the chalk? Right? Where's the chalk? Get back to it. Draw your beautiful drawings. That's all we got. So the problem that I had with this, and forgive me, I'm a journalist, I overthink everything. The problem that I had with this afterwards, as I started to heal, was that I suddenly sort of became infected with this doubt that maybe I didn't survive. Maybe I'd actually died, and I didn't know it. I know it sounds absurd, but from my perspective, I started reading about near-death experiences, NDEs, and the dream that I had, what happened in the trauma bay was bad enough, but just rewind to that dream. The dream that I had was a classic NDE. NDEs are, they fall into like 3 or 4 sort of main sort of buckets, all in societies all around the world. They're very similar. Historically, they're very similar. There's an incredible consistency in them, right? Which leads some people to say this, they constitute evidence of an afterlife. How else would there be such consistency, right? So I started reading about NDEs, and I realized that the dream that I had, where I was hovering above my family, was a classic experience of people whose hearts have stopped or whatever and are revived, and they come back and oh my God, I was hovering above my body, above the doctors, above my family. I was trying to communicate with them and I couldn't. I'd had a classic NDE in my sleep. And I thought, maybe actually that was when I died. I died in my sleep. And the rest of it, waking up, the pain in my abdomen, the trip to the hospital, the rest of it is a dying hallucination. And I'm the only one who doesn't know. Or there's multiple universes, parallel universes. And in one universe, that was me dying in another universe. And here I am. How do I get to the universe where I died to tell my wife and children, it's okay. Somewhere else, we're together. Like it's okay where I am. And psychiatrists have a term for this. It's called derealization, and it's the doubting of reality. And it's a very common thing with trauma. My poor wife, right? So she had to go through all this, and then her husband had to go crazy, right? And I turned extremely neurotic and anxious, and I really didn't recognize myself. And I started doing things like going up to her and grabbing her by her shoulders and saying, "Tell me you see me and I'm really here." Things like that no one wants to hear from their spouse, right? And at one point I did that, and she said, "Yes, honey, you're here. I see you. You survived. Don't worry about it." And in my, I thanked her, of course, but in my mind, I thought that's exactly the kind of thing a hallucination would say, right? Like, I am so onto you, right? It was a long time before I emotionally, psychologically could sort of face the task of researching and writing this book. And I go into the possibilities, the possible explanations for what I remember. The pit, my dead father. What are the possible explanations, and what are NDEs, and how does this all work? And while we're at it, what is the universe exactly, and why are we here? It's all, you ask one question about one of these fundamental things about reality, and you really end up asking about all of it. And I don't have time, and I think I say it better in the book than I can up here. But I sort of hash out what the explanations are, and is there a plausible scenario where there's a post-death existence of the individual? Is that in physical terms, in scientific terms, is that conceivable? And if so, how would that work? So at one point, my wife, in her growing frustration with me, posed this great question. She said, "Sebastian, do you feel lucky or unlucky that this happened to you? Not that you survived, but that it happened in the first place. Like if you could push a button and rewind and have it never have happened, would you push that button?" And I didn't know how to answer her. I felt uniquely cursed, like death was now sort of perched on my shoulder, like this sort of terrible raven cawing in my ear, "You're going to die, you're going to die." But on the other hand, yes, you're going to die, so live. It's possible you don't really know that you're alive until you really know that you're going to die. That's possible. And that moment came for me at age 58. So I couldn't answer, and I thought about it, and and it took a couple of years, and I finally looked up. I thought, okay, in sort of mythic terms, lucky or unlucky, she's really saying, are you blessed or are you cursed? Is this a blessing or a curse that this happened to you? Because I also was sort of favored with what felt like special knowledge. Like, hey, you got to go to the edge and look over, and we're allowed to come back. Lucky you, right? Who gets to do that? And so I looked up the word the origin of the word blessing, which is, forgive me, but when I'm stuck with something, I look up. I love etymology. I love the origins of words, right? So sometimes, like, if you look up the origin of a word that's related to something you're working on, it'll sort of open a doorway a little bit. And that's what happened with this. I looked up the word blessing, and it's derived from the Anglo-Saxon word for blood, which is bletzian. The idea was that there is no blessing without a wounding. There is no blessing without the shedding of blood. In fact, it is blood that consecrates a place like a battlefield, an event, and that you don't just get the blessing. They're twinned. You get the wound and the blessing at the same time. They're different sides of the same coin. And when I thought about it like that, all of a sudden, I felt okay with what had happened. Because I realized it's not just me and my terrible events. That's all of us. That's life. It's a blessing and a curse. It's both things. It has to be both things. And what we must do is maintain our faith that when we feel cursed, that somewhere there is a blessing we can derive from it, that the shedding of blood has given us special favor in some way. And likewise, when we feel blessed, when something really good happens, you must wonder somewhere, what is the wound, that the accompanying wound? What will I possibly pay for this? I'll leave some time for questions. I just want to say that it was a real honor to be here to speak to a full room. These are questions that we all face. I'm still an atheist. I'm happy to discuss why I am. There are no questions that are out of bounds or in bad taste or anything. I love conversation about important topics. So thank you again. It was a real pleasure.
Incredible story. What an incredible story. While we're getting set up, by the way, you want to ask a question, raise your hand, and the ushers will get a microphone to you to ask the question. But just briefly, a question first. So this experience, the sort of paradox of good luck and misfortune, the misfortune of having it, the good luck of doing it, having it at the right time, in the right place, that there were the right people to cure you. On balance, how has that all changed the way you live?
Well, for a while, I wanted to buy an apartment across the street from a hospital. I mean, seriously, had this happened in in an airplane or out camping or even in a traffic jam, I would have died. And so one of the ways, I know this is going to be a little bit trite, but forgive me. One of the ways it changed me is I have this sort of realization, like, I now know, not just abstractly but viscerally, that I could die at any moment. We could all die at any moment. So what are we going to do with this moment where we've been given a reprieve, at least for the next 5 minutes? Like, what are we going to do with this wealth, this miracle of existence? There was I saw an item in the news a few years ago. There was a woman in Canada, in Alberta, I think, and she was woken up in the middle of the night, 3 a.m, by this terrific bang on her roof. And she turned on the light, and there was a meteorite next to her head on the pillow. right? Luckily, she wasn't married because it would have killed her husband. No, so she, that thing had been cruising for millions and billions of years and come from like incredibly far away and missed her by inches, just like the bullet missed my head. And she got up, made a pot of tea, and sat in a rocking chair and looked at it for the rest of the night. It's a random universe, and it's a random in every aspect, including medically. And so I'm just conscious. I'm here, right? And when I drift off because I'm frustrated with my kids or this or that, or I'm caught in traffic or whatever, I reel myself back in, like, here you are. And after I finished the book, I'll just tell this very quickly. After I finished the book, I read an incredible story about the Russian writer Dostoevsky, who, when he was in his 20s, he was kind of a radical. He had some sort of very liberal friends, and they would sit around. They had a group called the Petrashevsky Circle, I think it was called. They would sit around and talk about outrageous things like freeing the serfs. And they eventually got the attention of the Tsar's police. They didn't take kindly to this. They arrested the whole lot of them and threw them in prison. And they spent 8 months in prison, and then were released one morning. They were taken out of their cells and put in a wagon to be driven to court, in their minds, driven to court to be released to their families. It wasn't a particularly serious crime, so they weren't really thinking about it, just relieved to be out. And instead of being released, they were driven to a city square and tied to posts, and a firing squad was arrayed against them. And the orders were given, charge your rifles, ready, aim. And at that moment, a horseman galloped into the square and said, "The Tsar forgives them, untie them." It was a mock execution, one of the most cruel things that can be done to a person. Two of the men, of the 6 men, were insane for the rest of their lives. I actually told my wife that. It didn't help my case much, but but Dostoevsky, because he survived that and is a writer and put this all down and thought about it, we know what the hallucinatory vision that a person has moments before they're going to die. We know what that looks like because he survived and he repeated it. And he had this moment. He looked out above the rifles and he saw sunlight glinting off the steeple of a church. And he thought, in moments, I'm going to join the sunlight. In moments, I'm going to be part of all things. And he also thought, if I should somehow survive this, I will turn every moment into a miracle. And indeed, we are part of all things. Our atoms that make up our body, and possibly our spirits, if such a thing exists, are indeed part of all things. We are part of the universe. And every moment is a miracle. And it's hard to keep it that way, trust me, right? We're human. But even knowing that that's true helps guide us towards sort of the true north of our life, like how we should be living and what we should be paying attention to. Thank you.
Okay, let's have some questions. Right down here.
Hi. Do you think that the pit and your father that you saw, do you think that that had a scientific or supernatural origin?
Wow, you're cutting right to the chase. So first of all, as a journalist, I can't assert something that I can't prove, right? Like, I have to put it as what's possible and what are the reasons for thinking it's possible. So there are, rationalists like my father who are neurologists and doctors, like, we can explain all this through neurology. Like the dying brain produces visions. You can give people visions with drugs. You can put them in a human centrifuge like fighter pilots and subject them to G-forces, and they'll see a tunnel and a light, and they'll hover above their body. And all this, we can reproduce most of this in the lab, as it were. We know how this works neurologically. And I sort of agree with that, right? Like, the rationalists are my baseball team, right? I'm always rooting for them, right? And it's fun to watch them win, right? But you must be rational about rationality. You must apply skepticism to the right process of skepticism, right? You have to apply skepticism to itself. So the skeptics are saying this, in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, there's all that, I'm with you, except for one thing. The dying see the dead. They have a unity of vision that doesn't happen if you give a room full of people LSD. They don't all see the same thing. And this isn't just people dying in dramatic circumstances. These are people dying in hospice care, right? These are people dying of cancer. These are, I mean, the consistency is extraordinary, and I can't quite explain it. So the skeptics, their rebuttal to that, I mean, this is in the literature, right? I'm giving away the whole book. Hopefully you'll buy it and enjoy the words I put down on paper. But so the skeptics are like, well, evolution clearly produced a reaction to the dying moment that comforts us in our last agonies, right? This evolution took care of this, like it takes care of so many things. And at first blush, that sort of makes sense, except that evolution doesn't care how you feel. The way natural selection works, the way Darwinism works, the way evolution works, is that things that increase your odds of survival or reproduction, those traits and behaviors show up, are overrepresented in the gene pool in the next generation and gradually become part of the human species. So for these visions to be produced by the dying brain, you're talking about very, very deep neurological structures that would have to be the product of evolution. Except in this case, by definition, there is no survival. There is no reproduction. You're talking about dying people, right? So how would that work? It doesn't make sense. It does not make any rational sense. So at that point, and I won't go any further than this in my explanation, at that point we are left, if we want to remain scientific about this, if you want to be spiritual about it, then that's a story, not an explanation. If you want to remain, and a beautiful story, but if you want to remain in the realm of explanation, you really wind up in quantum physics. And is there a conversation in quantum physics? Are there theories that might account for a post-death existence, a unity of consciousness in the universe? And there is. You know, they can't prove any of this, of course, but there's a way to talk about it that's rational, and I land in quantum physics. Once in a while, someone will take umbrage that I say I'm an atheist, and they will say, you know, science can't explain this stuff, right? And my response is, science can explain it fine. We're just not smart enough to understand the science. But this isn't science's failing if we don't know what happens after we die. It's our failing. We may never know. Our brains just simply might not be able to understand it.
Okay, another question. Hands,
Your talk reminds me of the French verb blesser, to be injured, but my question is, I teach health profession students. What advice do you give medical professionals based on your experience?
You mean advice to helping people who are dying? I mean, in my situation, is that? Yeah, okay. So first of all, they hear a lot more than doctors realize. I heard a whole conversation that was incredibly upsetting, right? And look, I get it. They're focused on saving my life, right? And I mean, I wouldn't have it any other way, but and I kept telling them I was in incredible pain, and they kept ignoring me because they probably didn't hear me because they were concentrating too hard, which is all as it should be. But understand that the patient is here, if they're not sedated, they're hearing more, and they don't understand why, if they try to talk to the doctors, why the doctors aren't answering. They seem like robots, right? And also, a dying person may have no idea they're dying, and I didn't, thankfully I didn't. I would have been terrified. But just understand that they may have no idea that the severity of what's going on. And finally, this other thing I would say is that the effectiveness, as I said before, of human touch, of a human connection in those terrible moments for someone, particularly if you can't sedate them adequately, that bonds. Someone, a nurse holding your hand and saying, breathe with me, I'm here, look at my eyes, keep your eyes open, I'm right here. Like, that is life-saving. And I think that connection, along with Dr. Gorn and Dr. Dombrowski, but my will to live played a role. I mean, the doctor's like, you shouldn't have even gotten to the hospital alive. Like, we literally don't know why you're alive, right? But that will to live was certainly reinforced by that human connection and may have played a crucial role in keeping me alive long enough for those guys to save me.
Hi, I'm changing tacks and asking about writing
Yep.
for writing students. So you're well known for writing, reporting about war and telling stories of other people. And I'm curious about what writing skills you took from that career as a journalist, a war reporter, to writing about your own self and your own adventure and brush with death.
Yeah, thank you. So the first writing that I did was not in war zones. My first book was The Perfect Storm. I'd been briefly to a couple of war zones, a total of about 8 months before I wrote that book. But really, it's it's good prose or good prose, and you strive for that, and which means that in any situation, in a war or not, anything you write about, I've written about the law, I've written about medicine, I've written about meteorology, I've written about war, about anthropology. It has to be efficient. It has to be clear. And it has to be words that people haven't seen in that same combination before. Like, everyone's always saying that the rain drummed on the roof and mortars slammed into the hillside. Like, never use the word drummed or slammed again in that context. We've seen it before. Like, don't bore us with something that we've already read from somewhere else, right? And it can almost always be shorter. Like, and the shorter it is, the more thought you put into it, and the more you get yourself out of the way. You want the writing to reflect on the topic, not on the writer. Like, you really want you want your ego out of there, and you want all of your expertise to create words that respect the reader's time. Like, can it be shorter? Can it be clearer? You are serving the reader. And you are also, what you don't want to do is say, you know what, that topic's too complicated. I'm not going to put that in there. The readers aren't going to understand it, or they're just going to be bored by it, and they're going to put down the book, blah, blah, blah. You're also serving the topic, right? And you need a sense of what subjects, what scientific material, what historical material a given topic deserves. So if you're going to write about a fishing boat sinking it, going down at sea in an area of 100-foot waves, you know what? You're going to have to write some meteorology, right? Or, I mean, I'm sorry, that's what the story's about, and it doesn't matter. You have no choice. You have to write about that because that's what sunk the boat. And if you're worried that your readers are going to find it a bit of a school lesson, well, then make it written so well that they're fascinated. But you have to put that in there. If you're going to write about, is there a post-death existence to the individual? Sorry, you're going to be writing about science. Like, what else would it be, right? And you're probably going to be writing about quantum physics because that's the ultimate reality of everything. And, I had good advice from smart people. No, bad advice from smart people. Like, no, get the physics out of there. No one wants to. I'm like, look, you asked me to write about life after death. How can I not have physics in there? Like, come on, what do you think? What do you think this is, right? And so you need to. You serve the words, right, and serve them well, and you serve the topic, and you have to get your ego out of there. I mean, those are sort of the three main things I would say. And the war zone stuff, in some ways that was easy to write about because it was so dramatic. I grew up in Belmont, a bedroom community of Boston. I wrote about a murder that happened there in 1963. That tested, Belmont, describing Belmont for a couple of paragraphs tested my writing ability. You know what I mean? Like, I graduated writing school right there. Wars are pretty easy to write about because they're so dramatic.
One more question.
I was just interested in your the mind-body connection between your dream and the time that you felt that pain in the cabin, because you said that you weren't yourself those 2 days. So did the doctors go back, or do you, in reflection, think that maybe it was brewing all that time?
Oh, I mean, the aneurysm was growing in my abdomen for probably my whole life. I mean, it comes from, I have a ligament in the wrong place. It's called median arcuate ligament syndrome. It's, quite rare. I think, one person, 100,000 has it. And so the ligament crushes the celiac artery, which is like this garden hose, right, of blood, and it crushes it. And so it forces the blood around to smaller arteries, which aren't designed to take that kind of blood pressure. And if there's a weakness in one of the walls, whatever, it will turn into an aneurysm. So in those final days, I mean, the unconscious mind, there is such a thing as the unconscious mind, and it has an understanding of things. And it's possible, as the aneurysm was getting really close to rupturing and might have even started leaking a little blood, possibly, that my body sort of knew, my unconscious mind knew, and it, I'd been ignoring a little bit of pain in my abdomen for about 6 months, and my mind was like, if you ignore pain and fear, you get to live a bigger life, and if you pay attention to them, your life shrinks because you're sort of like cautious about things, and that's true to an extent, except it also means you might live a shorter life, right? So, I think on some level, my mind was like, all right, well, we've tried pain for 6 months. It didn't get through to him. Let's send up a dream. See if that gets his attention. And if that doesn't work, well, we tried. I think we're out of time. If you have other questions, come to me afterwards. I'm happy to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Stay, go yet, because we have such a period. You talked a bit about whether we're lucky or not. We were truly lucky that you survived to come to tell us this wonderful story, and thank you so much. We do have a gift for you on behalf of the book festival. Flannery O'Connor's the cartoon.
Thank you, everybody.
And again, thank you very much. It was excellent.